You know, sometimes life goes on in such a normal way that we don't even imagine that something really bad could happen. Everything seems normal, routine, until a small event turns everything upside down. That's exactly what happened to Joao, a graduate student, a quiet guy, used to the busy life between the university and his small, messy apartment. He lived in a big city, full of movement and people in a hurry, so nothing surprised him anymore. It was a normal afternoon. The sun was setting, dyeing the sky orange and pink, when Joao was leaving the university library. He was tired after a full day of studying, eager to get home and rest. He put his backpack on his back, checking his pockets to make sure he hadn't forgotten anything. In his backpack, in addition to the books, he carried his laptop, some important documents, and his notebook, which he always carried with him. As he turned the corner to catch the bus, he felt a strong push that almost knocked him to the ground. "Hey!" he shouted, but the thief had already snatched his backpack and disappeared into the crowd. It all happened so fast that Joao could barely see the person's face. He was just a shadow running away and disappearing among the other people. At the time, it seemed like a boring incident. Who hasn't had something stolen in a big city? It was just another bad luck story to tell. Joao began to feel annoyed as he returned home without his backpack, thinking about the inconvenience of losing his documents and laptop. But when he got home, he realized that the day was far from over. On the apartment door was a note taped to him. A simple note with sloppy handwriting, but with a message that paralyzed him. "I know who you are, and I know where you live." Joao felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around, searching for someone, but the hallway was empty. Shivering, he ripped the note off the door and entered the apartment. He quickly closed the door, locking it with all the locks. He sat on the couch, still holding the note, trying to figure out what was going on. Hours passed, but Joao couldn't concentrate on anything. He called the police to report the theft, but they said there wasn't much they could do. As for the note, they suggested it might just be a bad joke. But Joao knew it wasn't a joke. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The next day he went to work, trying to act like nothing had happened, but he couldn't stop thinking about the note. When he returned home that night, the scene was even worse. The apartment door was open. He was sure he locked it when he left, but now it was open, just a crack, as if someone had broken in. With his heart racing, Joao pushed the door open and slowly entered. The apartment was a mess. Someone had tampered with everything, but in a disturbing way. It wasn't a simple invasion. Things were out of place in a very strange, almost calculated way. Her books were stacked upside down, her clothes strewn across the floor in strange patterns, as if someone had moved them, but at the same time had an intention behind each movement. The worst was on his desk. There, on top of the computer keyboard, was another note. "Don't hide. I see everything." Now there was no doubt. This was much more than a simple robbery. Joao felt panic rising inside him. He didn't know what to do. The thief knew where he lived, had broken into his apartment, and seemed to be playing with him. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Joao began receiving more notes, always brief, but increasingly sinister. The messages appeared in unexpected places. Inside the microwave, on the bathroom mirror, even inside his wallet. "I'm closer than you think. You won't escape me." Joan could barely sleep. He spent the nights awake, listening to every sound in the apartment, every creak in the walls, imagining that the thief could be there, hiding somewhere, watching him. He checked the building's security cameras, but there was nothing strange, no one suspicious. It was as if the thief was a ghost, always present but never seen. The situation came to a head when, on a rainy night, Joao heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It was a low noise, like something falling, but enough to make his heart race. He slowly got up, grabbed a knife from the living room drawer, and headed toward the kitchen. When he got there, everything was dark. The lights were flickering, and the kitchen was empty except for a new message scrawled on the wall in what looked like blood. "Next time it'll be me." That was enough for John. He no longer knew what was going on, who the thief was, or why he was being chased. But he knew he needed to get out of there before it was too late. That night, he packed his bags and ran out of the apartment, never looking back. But as he ran through the dark, rainy streets, an eerie feeling accompanied him, as if, somehow, the thief was following him. And deep down, João knew that, no matter how hard he tried to escape, this macabre game was not over yet. John's terror was not for what he knew, but for what he didn't know, what would come next. I hope you liked the story, because the second story is even more chilling. Just don't forget to see if you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. It was a cold, quiet night, one of those where the wind seemed to whisper secrets through the cracks in the windows. Larissa, a 22-year-old college student, was finally recovering from a messy breakup. She lived alone in a small apartment near the university. After the breakup, she started to feel a strange sensation, as if the air around her was charged with an invisible tension. It was almost as if something was watching, waiting. It all started very subtly. Strange noises outside the apartment. Sometimes sounds that sounded like footsteps echoed in the hallway, but when she looked through the peephole in the door, no one was there. "It's just my mind," she thought, trying to convince herself that she was simply nervous about the breakup. But something inside her, in the back of her mind, knew it wasn't just that. Weeks went by and Larissa started to get distracted by her studies. She had an important presentation at university, a group project she had been planning for weeks. The morning of the presentation, everything seemed normal. She and her group were anxious but ready. The project was saved on the flash drive. The slides were perfect. They entered the classroom, plugged in the flash drive, and got ready to begin. That was when everything fell apart. When the teacher gave the signal to start the presentation, something unexpected happened. Instead of project slides, a strange video started playing. At first, the video was just a black screen, but then a series of disturbing images appeared. Photos of dark places, distorted faces, and eerie music in the background. The images were fast, almost imperceptible, but they left a feeling of unease in those watching them. Larissa's heart raced. "That wasn't on our flash drive," she whispered to her friends, but no one could explain what was happening. The room was completely silent. The teacher, confused, tried to stop the video, but it seemed like the computer wasn't responding to any commands. When the video finally ended, everyone in the room was stunned, not knowing what to say. Larissa felt a deep sense of fear take over her body, as if something had marked her. That strange presentation seemed like a warning. After that day, things started to get even stranger. Larissa started noticing that items in her apartment weren't where she had left them. Lights flickered at night, even when there weren't any storms. Worse, she started receiving anonymous messages on her cell phone. At first, they were just random phrases, things like "you're not alone" or "he's watching you." She tried to ignore it, thinking it might be a joke or a sick joke. But the messages became more terrifying. One night, Larissa woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that she wasn't alone in her room. She heard a faint rustling, as if someone was standing next to her, but there was no one. Her heart was beating so fast that she could hear her own blood pounding in her ears. She picked up her cell phone in an attempt to calm herself, and there was another message: "You can't escape." From that moment on, she began to have constant nightmares. She dreamed of a man with his face hidden, always in the shadows, watching her. He never spoke, but his silence was more terrifying than any word. Every time she woke up, she had the feeling that someone had just left the room. At university, the situation became unsustainable. Larissa began to notice that people looked at her strangely and whispered among themselves, as if they knew something she didn't. Her friends tried to comfort her, telling her that it was all just a coincidence, but she knew there was something more. Something dark had haunted her since that presentation. she decided to investigate on her own. She searched for old files on the flash drive, checked folders and messages, and that's when she discovered something terrible. Among the files on her computer was an old video, recorded years ago, when she was still in the relationship that had just ended. It was a video of a fight with her ex-boyfriend. In the middle of their argument, he muttered something that, at the time, she didn't quite understand, but now made perfect sense. He said, "You'll never get rid of me. Wherever you go, I'll be there." Larissa froze. From that moment on, she knew that her ex-boyfriend had done something much more serious than just ending the relationship. It was as if he had put a curse on her. Everything that was happening, the noises, the videos, the messages, was no coincidence. He had awakened something she couldn't explain, and now it was haunting her life. Desperate, Larissa sought help. She went to see a lady who was said to be a healer in town. The woman looked at Larissa with heavy eyes, as if she already knew what she was going through. Without Larissa saying a word, the woman whispered, "He has tied your soul to his. You have to break that bond or he will take you." From then on, Larissa embarked on a dark journey to try to break free. With each step, her fear grew and she knew she was being watched. But she couldn't give up. Every night was a battle and every dream a warning. What Larissa didn't know, however, was that sometimes some connections can't be undone. And she was about to discover that escaping a curse could be as impossible as escaping her own shadow. I hope you liked the story, because the third story is even more chilling. Just don't forget to see if you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories. I hope you liked the story. Just imagine, the night started out like any other, and Pedro and his friends were eager to go to the much-talked-about off-campus party. They all commented that it would be the best part of the semester. Drinking, music, dancing, and maybe even making new friends. To Pedro, Ana, Carlos, and Luisa, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to relax after an intense week of studying. The group of friends had met in their first days at university and had done everything together ever since. As they walked down the dirt road leading to the party house, the sky was clear and the cool night air filled their lungs. The moon, full and bright, illuminated the path, and the sound of crickets and leaves rustling in the wind created a peaceful atmosphere. Luisa, always full of energy, danced as she walked, and Carlos made jokes to liven up the group. "Man, it's going to be amazing," said Carlos. "Everyone on campus will be there. I just hope it's not too crowded." Pedro, however, was already starting to feel something strange, a sensation he couldn't explain. It wasn't clear at all, just a slight discomfort, as if something was out of place. But he shook his head and decided to ignore it. He thought it was just the anxiety of being at a big party. When they reached the entrance of the house, the place was packed. Colored lights flashed to the beat of the loud music that was escaping from the walls. There were people everywhere, some dancing near the giant speakers, others chatting in small groups in the front yard. It looked like a typical college party. Pedro and his friends walked in, greeted acquaintances, and grabbed drinks from the tables scattered around the room. They soon found themselves immersed in the party atmosphere, laughing, drinking, and talking. But, as the night progressed, Pedro began to notice something strange. Small details that at first seemed insignificant, but now kept catching his attention. He was talking to a classmate when he noticed a mark on the boy's neck. It was a green spot, like a bruise, small but clearly visible on the side of her neck. Pedro looked closer, intrigued, but didn't say anything. Maybe it was just a bruise, something normal. But then, as he looked around, he started to notice that more people at the party had similar marks. They were identical, in the same place on their necks. He frowned, trying to understand what that meant. "Hey, have you ever noticed these marks on people's necks?" Pedro asked, interrupting the conversation between Ana and Carlos. "What marks?" Ana asked, looking around. Pedro discreetly pointed to a group of people near them. They all had the same green mark on their necks. "Wow, that's strange," Carlos said, coming closer. It must be something from the party, like a joke or something. It must be nothing. Anna, however, remained silent for a few moments, observing the people around her. I don't know, Pedro. This is kind of weird. How could they all have the same mark? It's not normal, is it? Pedro nodded, feeling a knot in his stomach. Something there wasn't right, and he could feel it. But before he could think about it any further, a group of people passed by, laughing loudly, and for a moment, Pedro felt a little dizzy. It was as if the air around him became heavier, denser, almost suffocating. He tried to get rid of this feeling, but it persisted, as if something was wrong with the environment. Dude, I think the music is too loud. Shall we take a walk outside? Pedro suggested, trying to hide his discomfort. Carlos, Anna, and Luisa agreed and went out into the garden, where the noise was lower and the air was fresher. Outside, however, the atmosphere seemed even stranger. The people talking there also had green marks, and Pedro noticed that some looked paler than usual. Their eyes were empty, as if they were distant, disconnected from reality. Pedro, look over there, Luisa suddenly said, pointing at a figure standing on the other side of the garden, almost hidden in the shadows of the trees. He was a tall man, wearing a dark coat and standing completely still, watching the group from afar. His eyes were cold, fixed on Pedro and his friends. But the scariest thing was that he also had a bright green mark on his neck, even more visible under the dim moonlight. Let's get out of here, Pedro said, in a low voice, trying not to attract attention. They began to walk slowly towards the gate of the house, but the feeling of being watched did not go away. In fact, it has only increased. With each step, Pedro felt as if something was closer, more oppressive. He looked back and saw that the man in the dark coat was no longer where they had seen him. Hurry up, Pedro, Anna whispered, visibly nervous. They headed towards the dirt road that led back to the campus. The group was still a few hundred meters behind them, but the sound of music and conversation seemed to dissipate into the air. Everything became eerily silent, except for the hurried footsteps of the friends and the occasional rustle of the surrounding trees. Guys, that wasn't normal, Luisa began, looking around nervously. I felt like that person was following us. Pedro didn't answer, but he too had the same feeling. He looked at the trees lining the road and, for a brief moment, saw something moving in the shadows. His heart raced. That figure in a dark coat seemed to be following them, but it was hiding in the shadows of the trees. Run! Pedro suddenly shouted, unable to control his panic. And, as if that word had activated a survival instinct in the group, they all ran down the street. The sound of quick, disorderly footsteps echoed in the night, and the icy wind hit their faces. Fear took hold of each of them. Luisa stumbled and was about to fall, but Carlos caught her and pulled her to keep running. Pedro felt his heart pounding loudly in his ears, and the only thing on his mind was getting to the campus, where maybe they would be safe. But when they finally reached the campus gates, the scene that awaited them was even more terrifying than they had imagined. The people on campus, colleagues, friends, and even some professors, were standing there, staring straight at them. And all of them, without exception, had the same bright green mark on their necks. These people's eyes were empty, expressionless. It was as if they were no longer themselves, as if they were controlled by something much larger and more sinister. What's going on? Anna whispered, her voice full of fear. Peter took a step back, feeling the ground shake beneath his feet. Everything was wrong. The marks, the strange behaviors, the whispers that seemed to follow them from the party. They were surrounded. And at that moment, Peter was sure that the danger wasn't just at the party. It was everywhere. Terror enveloped them completely, and they suddenly realized that there was nowhere to run. The green marks, like an infection, were spreading. Tell me which story made your hair stand on end? Tell me which one you liked the most? Because in the next video the story is even more chilling, Just don't forget to see if you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying stories.